Hello all, welcome to another session of SDE Skills. Today we are going to do a mock interview. Shubham is candidate and DP Agarwal is going to be a mock interviewer. So with this, I would like to hand it over to both you folks.
Yeah. So, hi, Shubham.
Hi.
So before we start, can you tell me briefly about your work experience, if you have any?
Yeah, I have experience of 3.5 years working as a software developer in a healthcare-based startup in
Okay.
Delhi. And now I moved to US to pursue the master's in computer science. I'm in my second semester right now. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Sounds good. Um, all right. So today I'm thinking like I want to go over design of this, chat application, and I want to have you think around something around like Facebook Messenger, right? WhatsApp is a little different, but yeah.
Okay.
So it's basically like sending, receiving message, and yeah.
Okay. So I will start with the basic functional requirements, which would require uh, a few questions for this. I'll just
Yeah.
ask simultaneously. Okay. So my first functional requirement, which would be very important for Facebook, like it would be a one-to-one conversation between two people.
Well, yeah. So what I want here is I want you to optimize for one-on-one chats, but I also want you to keep in mind that we want to add group chats.
Okay, add group chats as well. Okay.
Yeah, like more like an enhancement, but first focus on optimizing one-on-one.
Okay. So do we just need to just share the text, or we can share the photos and videos as well?
Right, right. So similar way as the first requirement. So focus on text only to begin with,
Okay.
but I want to see, how you design to include other multimedia later.
Okay. Okay. So for now, I'll just focus on text. Okay. And then afterwards, I'll just move to photos and other.
Yeah, yeah. Just to be clear here, right? When we say later on, sure, we may not want to go deep dive into multimedia, but I want to see how you design, keeping in mind that we want to add that feature later,
Okay. Okay.
right?
And the next would be like the status of the offline and online of the users, right?
Yeah, I would say don't worry about that for now in this version.
Okay. Okay. And what about push notifications?
Uh, you mean just the notifications, right? If you have messages.
Like if
Yeah,
I like if I'm
right,
not active on Messenger, like I'm
right,
doing something else, then push notification would be right.
right. So I would say I'm thinking of other requirements before that, but you can keep a note of it. Yeah.
Okay. What all requirements you have in mind?
So I want you to think around. I want to have design around. Uh, you have conversations, and each conversation can have messages. Will have messages, right?
Yeah.
So I want you to support conversations view and messages view in your design.
Okay. And any other thing you have in mind?
Um, I think this is, I mean, of course, like that send receive is basic. Yeah, I think this looks good to me.
Okay. Okay. Fine. So should I just move to the what is the estimation and constraints like capacity and bandwidth and all?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay. So so let's suppose I have 500 500 million active users on daily basis. Okay.
Okay.
And I have each user sends the, let's suppose 30 messages, right? Okay, and so that means I have approximately
Do you want to add that you're talking about per day, right?
yeah, to 30 images per day, and then I have approximately 15 billion messages, right,
Right.
per day.
Mhm.
And if I need to, if I, let's suppose, what is the storage for this, then I would be like 15 billion into, let's suppose I take it as 100 bytes, right?
Okay.
Then it would be approximately 1.5 TBs, right?
Mhm.
Right, per day, and and uh, just want to ask that till what time I need to store this. I mean, should I store
Right.
for
Right. So think of it something like, I don't know, just guess like maybe 10 years, let's say we want to store.
okay, so like it's like, so for this, if I store it for 10 years, like 1.5 TB into 365,
Mhm.
okay, 10 years, right,
Mhm.
like this, right?
Right,
Then
right.
we around let's say
You can round 365 to like 300. So it would be about
something of 8 or 9 petabytes,
petabytes, yeah,
right?
something. Yeah.
Yeah, so I would just say,
About 5 petabytes, I think.
yeah, around that. So that's all for storage. Okay,
Mhm.
and if I now go with the like high level design, right?
Mhm.
Like how to when to send the SMS and how the receiver will receive the SMS, not
Mhm.
the SMS, the chat, the message, and then how the user the user get the notification then that the message has been delivered. Like,
Mhm.
so if I just go here and just draw.
If you're talking about notification, like user getting a notification that message is delivered, do you think your QPS will vary? Like back in your estimations, right?
Yeah,
So you had what, 15 billion messages per day uh, sent by user, right?
yeah,
If we are also talking about user getting a notification back.
yeah.
Uh,
So talking about bandwidth, what would be the bandwidth?
no, I'm talking about even the first point you have here, which is 500 million active users per day and each user sending 30 messages.
Yeah,
So you calculated 15 billion messages per day,
yeah,
right?
exactly. Yeah.
So I'm just, we don't need to go into details here, but I'm just curious, since you talked about user getting a notification, that message has been delivered, would that impact that number of requests?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I think so. It will affect that, but it depends that how we partition the data, how we partition the
Mhm.
messages onto different servers.
Mhm.
If we are partitioning it on the basis of message ID or user ID, then I think
Mhm.
it won't affect the multiple requests at the same time.
Okay, yeah, that's fine. Let's continue with the design. I just wanted your thought process on that.
Okay. So okay, so this is the user one. This would be my user two. And then I have a chat server. Uh, this would be my chat server.
Mhm.
I just put one data storage for now. We'll discuss what type of data storage would be there. Okay. So this is would be my storage, okay, data storage. Okay. So it's like that the user one sends the SMS to the user two, okay? And the chat server first receives it,
Right.
okay? So user A sends the SMS to user two, right, to the chat server, okay? And this chat server receives the message, right? And and sends the acknowledgement to the user one that it receives the message, right? That user one has successfully sent the message to the chat server, right? Okay, and then the server will store the message, right? First store the message to the data storage, just to make sure that if the user two is not available, then the message should not be should not be lost.
Sure.
So then it's just store the message to the data storage first, and then it will send the same message to the user two, okay? So if the user two is online, okay, and the user two receives the message, right? Then it sends the acknowledgement to the server, then that the user two has received the message. And when the acknowledgement is being passed from user two to the chat server, then the chat server will notify user one that the message has been passed to the user two.
Right.
Right. So this is a two-way communication.
Sure.
So just label this for now. So this one would be.
That's fine. I think we are on the same page here.
Okay. Okay. So so that's how the communication takes place between the user one and user two.
Okay.
And if the user two is offline, let's suppose, okay, the user two is not available, then the SMS, the messages would be saved on the data storage, right? With a flag that the messages are not being sent to the user two because user two is not available, okay? And then the chat server can notify user one as well that the user two is not user two is not available. That the notification is not being sent to user two right now.
Okay, that's fine. Yeah, that sounds good to me. Can you write down the APIs that you are supporting based on the requirements we talked about?
Yeah, sure. So can I just write it over here?
Yeah.
Okay. So first API would be like the one-to-one conversation, right, between the user one and user two. So it's like API would be send message. Right? So one would be the message one. Okay, what is the message sent by the user one? Then I have the user ID, right? I have the timestamp. Timestamp one at that the time at which the user sends
Message was sent. Yeah.
yeah, and the next one would be the status of the user, right? Whether it is active or not active. Okay, and then when this API is being given to the the server, it will just store the message on the basis of the user ID and the timestamp. Right.
So here you said user ID, right? That's the sender ID, I believe.
Yeah, this is a sender ID. Yeah.
So what about receiver, right? You would need something.
Okay, so like
Who is this message intended for?
yeah, so there's a socket connection which is already being made between the sender and the receiver, right? So if there's a socket connection,
No,
so
but how would I know who is the receiver here?
okay, so I just append the one more ID over here with the receiver ID. Okay. And then I have the I have this database where I will store the message message with the sender ID and the receiver ID, like a hash map or something. Like,
so hash map of I'm not sure. So what exactly can you talk about that structure?
okay.
Hash map for what?
Okay, so it's like so let's suppose I am having a sender ID, like, so sender ID would be sender ID. I have a table. Let's suppose the user table first.
Okay.
Just design the table for now. Okay, the user table. So it would have the name. Okay, the basic information.
No, I don't want you to go into right now. I don't want to distract you from the API design. But since you mentioned about Hashmap, right? What at high level, what are you planning to store in Hashmap?
Okay, so Hashmap is like the key would be the sender ID. Okay.
Okay.
So if it's having the key, so if I have the key as, yeah, so sender ID. So the messages could be like there could be multiple messages sent by the one user to one receiver, right? So let's suppose I have one sender ID, okay, which is the key, and the value would be the receiver ID, okay, and it is again a key value pair. It's like a hash map into a hash map.
Okay.
Receiver ID, and then I have here message one, okay,
Okay.
and with the timestamp. If I have
Message one plus timestamp is your value of the inner hash map.
yeah, it's like it's like has a two columns in that, like it's like there's a list or something.
Okay.
Like, so
I see.
so this case is when we have multiple messages to be sent by one sender ID, like
yeah, but we want to, like we talked about in our, okay, let me go back to the requirements here. I see what you're trying to say. You're talking about one sender, multiple messages between sender receiver. Yeah. But I want to remind, right, we want to break it down as conversations and messages. So if you open Messenger, for example, and you're talking to, let's say, you have chat with 5 friends, one-on-one, then you have, 5 like conversations, views there. And when you click on one, if you, click on your chat with, let's say, your friend 1, you will see the recent messages from that conversation.
Okay.
Right.
Okay, so I have 2 APIs would be here. That first would be send message, would be like similar to sender ID, receiver ID, as a parameter of value, message one and timestamp only. Okay, this would be the send message, right? And so sender ID would be my key, and these 3 would be my the attributes of the value. Okay. The next would be the like the receive messages, right? So if I like you said that I just open a chat box and I have talked to like 5 to 10 people in the last 2 days. So so now I need to send the see all the conversations, right?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So if I just say the this API would be like show messages. Okay, so it would be like my the user ID would be I am seeing the the conversation, so
yeah,
that would be the user ID. Okay, and so this is like a response body. Okay, so so if only it had the user ID, it will just give me the user ID and the senders, right? So the friends, I would say the friends ID as a list. So in return, what I get is I get the response JSON.
So when you say messages, I think if you're passing list, friends list here, then I guess you're talking about conversations, not messages.
The chat history, I will just return the chat history.
No, I think I'm not sure if we are capturing the right. So there are 2 things here, right? We are talking about conversations and we are talking about messages within conversation. So let's say you, I am chatting with you, right? So in your Facebook Messenger, you will have one view which says, Dippy, and you will have first message shown there. Then you have your second friend and you have the top message showing up there. So that's a conversation. And when you open the chat with me, then you see the last 10 conversation or messages in that conversation.
Okay, so what I'm doing is I'm just retrieving the whole messages right now, okay, and will show the last most message on a conversation.
Yeah, so just to be clear, right? When you say show messages, since we are already using the word, I mean, I don't want to confuse you here, but I think I'm afraid you might get confused if you follow this terminology. Are you saying here show conversations or show messages?
So show the whole conversations, like the whole chat.
List of conversations, right? Different conversations here. Okay.
So I have the user ID, okay, and then I have the list of friends to
Sure.
whom I just want to see the whole conversations, okay.
Yeah.
And then the response body, the response JSON would be like, so I have this friend ID 1, right? This would be my key. It's like a list of JSON, okay. So the friend ID 1, then would be the message 1, okay. The message text like this, and then I have the timestamp, like timestamp 1.
Why do you need to have a parameter of list friends in your show conversations? So when you, let's say, log in and you're trying to fetch your conversations, you pass your user ID, right?
Yeah.
Then why do we, I see the response here. I understand that part, that you're trying to get, different conversations by friends, the different friend IDs, but why do we need the parameter of list friends?
Okay, because so if a user has, let's suppose, 1,000 friends, and he has talked to, let's suppose, 30 to 40 friends, let's suppose 200 friends, right, in past, right? So but a user just wants to see the friends who he has clicked recently, right? Let's suppose.
No, but that's not something you handle on the client side, right? That's something your server has to do. You give you top, let's say, show 10 conversations or, view of that. You don't pass that, okay, I want conversation list with, DP and,
Okay.
other people.
Okay.
So
yeah, just
think about like, let me give you a hint here. So the way I'm thinking of the design, that you don't pass the list of friends, right, that you are trying to fetch conversations for. What you're trying to do is do you want to think about how many conversations or what's the offset sort of,
okay.
let's say you log into Facebook, right?
Yeah.
And the requirement is Facebook is showing you top 10 conversations view, right?
Yeah.
And then you have a next and you get to the next 10 conversations, right? So
Okay.
does that
Okay, yeah, it makes sense. So what I'll do, I'll just bifurcate this API into two parts. Okay.
okay?
So one would be like the user ID. Okay.
Sure.
Like I have logged into the system. Okay.
Yeah.
And the server knows that, according to me, that I have chatted to the with the 10 most, or the 10 recently users. Okay. Then it will just give me the 10 friend IDs, like a key value pair. Okay. And it will just show it to me, right? And if I just want to show the messages of a particular friend, let's suppose,
Sure. Yeah.
let's suppose I have clicked on friend ID 1, okay,
Right.
and I can see only the top 10 messages of that friend,
Yes.
okay.
Yes.
And when I just scroll up, right, like we
Yeah. You can get more. Yeah.
we get more and more messages, right?
Yeah.
So for that, I just have one more API, like show message with the user
Yeah.
ID and the friend ID. Okay. And then it will just fetch me the older conversations, right?
Sure.
So the response JSON would be almost similar. It's just that we have only one key, and then we have the value as the list of values, like the message text and the timestamp.
Mhm. And this would be show messages, right?
So sorry, show messages. So,
yeah. Would you need any other field here? So you have clicked on user ID. Since we are, what about conversation ID?
conversation ID.
I mean, so if the way we are looking at hierarchy is you're a user, you have conversations with multiple users, and even with one particular friend, you can have two different conversations.
Yeah, so it depends on actually it depends on the time span, right? So let's suppose that I have talked to a person like recently, and I had, let's suppose, 100 messages, and then I have talked to the same person a month back, right? And then 2 months back, right? So when I just scroll down, it's like pagination, right? So
Sure. Right.
so it will just give me the most recent messages. Okay. And then it will just also the send as like not the conversation ID. It's like it will send the timestamp actually, like what is the current timestamp I'm at in the conversation which I'm seeing.
Okay. How will that help me?
Okay, so it will help me like a offset. So let's suppose currently I'm at, let's suppose today is 14th of August, right?
I see what you're saying. So you're trying to think of that idea that, okay, show me messages within last, let's say 1 hour or last 1 day. That's where you're planning to use timestamp.
Yeah, it's like offset.
That's fine. So let me also go back to your API here once. So you see how we talked about the reason I was trying to think about conversation ID is how would you think about you were talking about one-on-one chats, right?
Yeah.
And we said that we want to have flexibility of adding group chats.
Yeah.
So if we are having a chat, we can be a part of the group and there can be different conversations that we are part of.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So how would you think about that, going back to your send message API?
It's very confusing.
Okay, so we can maintain the status of a group chat ID. Like we can have a separate group chat objects like in our system, which is maintained by the group chat ID. Okay, so we can in databases we can store all the group chats in a separate table, which is differentiate or partition based on the group chat ID.
No, that's fine. Let's not talk about partitioning and all, but I want to first focus on the API here, right?
Okay, so we maintain that status on the basis of group chat ID. So in API basis, let's suppose I am sending the message, right? Message 1, okay. And if I'm having the group chat, that means that all that the group is already been created, right, on the messenger, right? And when I'm when I have the when I just log into the Facebook app messenger, then I get all the IDs automatically, like all the centered IDs, sorry, all the friends IDs and all the group chat IDs as well.
Sure.
Right? So when I have the group chat IDs, that means I'll just I just replace the receiver ID with the group chat ID.
Okay. So let's say your receiver ID is not just one-on-one, then you're saying it can be a group ID as well, right?
It will be group ID as well, yeah.
Okay, sounds good. And how would you just briefly touch upon? So you said message, right? It is a text message, but how would you extend support your API for additional multimedia?
okay, for additional multimedia, for sending, we can use like a blob thing or something to send the multimedia.
No, just in terms of API, right? So here, would you add another field? Would you adapt your message field? What will you do here?
So I just keep the message one as intact, like it's only in a text format. Okay. I'll just add the additional field of a multimedia, like a video or a photo for that.
Okay. All right.
A photo ID or something, right?
I mean, it would be actual media, right? It won't be ID for at this point, but yeah, that's fine. You're planning to have a separate field for that.
Yeah. And then just store it in some S3 and just store store that URL of the S3 in the database to retrieve these multimedia later on.
Yeah, that's fine. Okay, so let's. So probably you talked about offsets here, right? So I believe in show conversations API also, you want to add offset column, right? That's fine. I mean, I think we talked about.
I don't think so for show conversation offset. I think for show messages, I need offset, of course. Yeah.
No, I mean, if you have had conversations with, let's say, 20 friends, you don't want to load your UI with 20 views of 20 conversations, right?
If I have a fixed offset, like just show 5 on the UI, it depends on the UI. So if I just show the 5, then I just give the it's like a settings thing. In settings, we can just add it like.
Okay. So I want to move on a bit, and I want to talk a bit more about. You talked about partitioning and sharding and stuff, right? So what would be your the scalability approach for storing messages?
Okay, so
and supporting all these APIs. Yeah.
Okay, so we can partitioning, or we can store on the basis of the user ID. Okay, so let's suppose that the different users are sitting in different areas, like, and we have different servers for that, right? So we can partition on the basis of the hash of the user ID. Okay. So that the messages can be stored. Okay. So
when you say hash by user ID, so let's say, so what will be all messages of that user will be on one machine? Is that?
Yeah, I think so, yes. But for, let's suppose for the fault, let's suppose that the server goes down, then we should keep the replica of that. But for now, for the hash of the user ID, then we should store the SMS, all the messages of that user onto the one server.
Okay. So how would what are the other? So you talked about the loss of data, right? If some server goes down, you possibly want to replicate. That's good. Is there any other trade-off or any other metric by which we can consider sharding? Or any other drawback, first of all, of this user sharding by user ID?
I was thinking.
So let's maybe walk through these APIs, right? Okay. So you have a send message. You are sharding by user ID. So that means you will hash by sender ID, and all your messages will go on that particular server. Certain server, right? Now let's say I come in and you send the message to me. So now let's, even before that, right? If you log into Facebook, and it will show you the conversations, correct?
Yeah.
So your show conversations, again, you're going to hit that server. So can you, I'm thinking if you can, walk through this, how user ID sharding will be supported by all these different APIs you have.
Okay, I'm just thinking about.
So what happens if, let's say, think more about both from sender side and receiver side, right? You log in, you hit a certain server. You are a receiver, to whom you send the message, right? I'm a receiver and you send the message to me, I also hit a certain server.
Okay.
So is there, I mean, we can just think aloud, right? You don't have to like just think about just the final answer, or there's no right or wrong here, right?
Okay, so I'm just thinking about how the let's suppose if there are many messages, like if there are thousand or million messages of a particular user, and it resides on a particular server, right? So and let's suppose he has messages of different users which are located on different regions of the world, right? And that would be on different servers, right? So let's suppose I'm sitting in US and I've talked to the 5 people all around the world, and those messages would be reside on different servers, right? So there would be a centralized chat server, okay, where it will just fetch the information or the messages from that servers, okay, and from that 5 servers, and it will of course fetch the information from my server, like from my database where I'm sitting, right? And then it will just combine all of those things and send the response as a JSON to the show conversation.
I think you went a bit ahead about, you're suddenly talking about distributing and scaling. I mean, of course, given that you're talking about partitioning, that makes sense. But let me first, take a step back and ask you how you're thinking about just focus on send message and show conversations, right? In show conversations, you have a user ID, which is more
Yeah.
like the receiver ID.
Yeah.
Right? And in send message, you have sender ID and receiver ID. So are you saying that you have one server, right, where you hash by sender ID and you store the message there?
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? And then when I come, if the message is intended for me, I log in, right? And that's my user ID, right? I have a receiver ID.
Yeah.
And then I call this API show conversations, right?
Yeah.
Then how will I get that message? Because my ID is different and I won't hit the same server.
Okay. So yeah, so your ID would be different, but sorry, but the if we use the hash technique,
Sure.
right? Then it would give me the same result. Like the receiver ID would be
How
same.
will it give you the same result? I mean, how are you planning of hashing then? Maybe I should ask that. You have a sender ID, you have a receiver ID.
Yeah.
How are you ensuring that both of them hash to the same? And that's the whole purpose of hashing, right? Somewhere you have some algorithm by which you are distributing the load, and you don't want to, if you have a deterministic hash, then that is just not, first of all, it won't even it will totally defeat your design, right? If your sender and receiver hash to the same value, how will you even distinguish the messages sent by one versus other? Does it make sense, like the concern we are talking about?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So how about so let me give an idea here that I'm thinking around. So how about if you store the message at 2 places, right? You have multiple servers, and you're storing, when the sender sends a message, you hash it, send it to a particular server, let's say server 1, and you also capture the receiver ID and you hash that and you send it to another server, right?
Yeah.
Whichever server it is. So if you're talking about one-on-one chats, you are sending to 2 servers, right?
So I'll just send the message one for sender ID and the receiver ID for both the IDs to both the servers.
Both the servers, right?
Yeah.
That can be one design. So what do you think about the good and bad here? Like, what are the trade-offs we are making here?
So we are just duplicating the
Sure.
message stored, right, on different servers. And so
Right.
first thing is this. The second thing would be like that. Let's suppose if a servers goes down, then it would be like 2 times, right? The exponential duplication, right? So that's why I think this design would not be that much accurate on the basis of if we think about storage.
Okay, that
If
makes
we have
sense.
the central server where
Okay.
where we just uh, map the sender ID and the receiver ID hashing of both the servers onto one system, then we don't need to store the messages on both the servers.
That is fine, but that again comes back to your original point, right? It
No, we are
yeah,
no.
I see your point. Like, you are somewhere having that algorithm which ensures that you are saving it on the same server.
I'm saving the sender ID, receiving ID hashing on both the servers, but not the messages. Messages only onto one server, where the sender ID and the receiver ID as like a hash map of both the servers of hashing would be mapped to a message onto the central server, so that
Okay,
we
so
cannot.
now you are talking about 3 servers. You're talking about, then why do you need even 2 servers in the beginning, right? If you're only going to store the hashes of them, and then you're going to have a third centralized server where you're going to have another layer, right?
Not the
Then,
not the third not the third not the third central
okay,
server actually. It's
okay.
just the either of the 2 servers, or actually both the servers. I can just save the SMS. So one server would be used as the primary and the second server would be used as the backup.
Okay, so let's talk about that, right? If you think that way, then if you're eventually going to, so basically you're talking about 2 servers more for replication,
Exactly.
right? Primary and secondary.
Yeah, exactly.
But again, that goes back to the original point that I mean, there is loss of availability. If you're logged in, if both senders and receivers are logged in, there would be contention, right? You're hitting the same server for the messages.
So if
Is that a
let's suppose,
problem? Or?
no, let's suppose there are 2 servers. Okay, the first server is server A and the second is server B. Okay, and then the server A has the messages for sender A and B both as both. The conversation, the message chat is actually
Okay.
in both the servers, right? So I am hitting server A and my receiver would be hitting server B. Okay,
Okay.
and I got the conversation, he got the conversation, right?
Yeah,
So
right.
if
So
one
yeah.
of them goes down, let's suppose server B goes down, right?
Okay.
Then I eventually would just hit server A, and then he'll also hit server A, right?
Right. So
When
you're
server B
talking
goes
about
down.
fault tolerance here. If I'm catching that right, you're trying
Yeah.
to address fault tolerance,
Yeah.
that you're maintaining messages on both. Whereas like in the beginning, the limitation you talked about was duplication of storage, right? When we say that if I send a message, I send it to one server, I hash by sender ID, send it to one server, I hash by receiver ID, send it to another server, right?
Yeah.
So it's the same idea, but what I'm trying to nudge you towards is, I think you're on the right track, that you have the replication and you notice that we are doing duplication. But so that's good point. But what about, that's handling fault tolerance, but what about scalability, right? Like, how you're going to partition your data. Right now you have messages on both. So let's say, let me, point you towards, so what we talked about makes sense. So what about conversations, right? Or
Yeah.
show messages?
Yeah.
So how would that be supported by this API or by this design? So I'm with you on so far that you have 2 servers and
Yeah.
you're having messages on both the servers, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
That's fine. So how would we, if you talk about show messages,
Okay.
right? I thought we also talked about we should have a conversation ID here, right? Because messages belong to a conversation.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, we can have it. Yeah.
And do you see, I'm just trying to keep a tap on the time also. So before I switch to a completely different topic here, show messages. What do you think about this design that we talked about in terms of group messages? So if you look at the requirements, right, we
Yeah.
want to optimize for one-on-one, which is something we talked about,
Okay.
one possible design. But if you want to keep the extension to group chats in your mind while designing, what do you think would be the trade-offs of the current design for group chats? You understand the question, right?
Yeah.
We just
Yeah.
talked about this
Yeah.
2-server system.
Yeah. Yeah.
So now if I, instead of sender receiver, if I'm broadcasting messages to group.
Okay, so if in a group there are 5 people, like,
Yeah.
and all the 5 people, the worst case scenario of all the 5 people are sitting at extremely different locations in the world, right, in different continents, right, and they would have, of course, they would have different servers linked with them, okay, and then the messages would be stored in each server, okay, for the group chat, and then they would just retrieve the messages on the basis of the group chat ID.
Right, right.
Right. And of
yeah,
course,
so basically you're duplicating X number of times, right? If you're sending a group chat and the group chat has 5 people, you are duplicating your message across 5.
okay, what we can do is, for the group chat messages, we can have a centralized server, okay, and where all the messages are stored, okay, and that would be linked with the group chat ID and the friend ID, okay, and the server ID, of course, that which server that these messages, these messages are linked to which server, okay, and then we can retrieve the group messages from that central server to we can distribute the messages of that group ID to different servers correspondingly.
Okay, okay, and how would you know which user is mapped to which group? Like you have, that's one possible design, what you talked about. You're kind of redirecting if you notice that it's a group chat, then you're redirecting it to a central server, sort of, right?
Yeah, exactly, yes. And we can map, like you asked, at how we just know that which user is it. So we can we can map on in the central server with the group ID, and as well as the individual servers, only the group ID and the user ID.
Okay, okay. Yeah, that's fine. I think we are kind of running short on time. So let me maybe switch gears here, because this could have been a longer, go into a longer discussion. Can we talk about, can you talk to me about trade-offs of, you talked about user ID as one, possible way of organizing your data. Is there any other, like, what would happen if you do it by conversation ID?
Okay. So for the conversation, so the conversation ID would be like a primary key. So like if I'm talking to a person, right? So the conversation ID would be same for like 5 years chat or something like that.
If it's a group chat, yes, you will have, each chat has one conversation ID, and in each chat you can have multiple messages. Yeah.
And if I'm talking to a particular person, then the conversation ID would be unique for like 10 years, like that, right?
Sorry, for what?
If I'm talking to a person, well, like a one-to-one person, right? Then the conversation ID would be unique, right? For a
conversation ID will be unique for every different chat you have. And that chat can be a group, or it can be a user. Yeah.
So, okay. So let's suppose if I'm storing on the basis of the conversation ID rather than the user ID, then it would be more beneficial because like the conversation ID, I can store the whole conversation, on the basis of the conversation ID on two different servers, like server A and server B. I'll hit server A. My friend will hit server B if he's just living distance far apart. And yeah, so let's suppose, yeah, so I'm hitting server A, he's hitting server B on the basis of conversation ID. And in conversation ID, I'll have that that who has sent which SMS, which message, right? That would be stored in the table according to conversation ID. And and of course there would be duplication for it, like the previous case. But it would be helpful for me if according to the if we look at the fault tolerance. So
Mhm.
like we discussed, that if my server goes down, then I'll hit server B.
Okay. All
That,
right.
yeah.
And so going to your point about fault tolerance, and you have talked about read scalability a bit, right? If one server goes, how are you, if multiple, let's say I send a message, different users are sending like messages to the, their friends, and a lot of people are logging in and trying to check their messages, right? So I
Yeah.
think in your design, I noticed that you're trying to talk about, I have 2 servers or 5 servers, and then you're going to, distribute the load. So one
Yeah.
user will hit one server and so on. Can you think of any other way that you can improve, fetching of conversations, or like how would you
Like the server, like if a user goes down or something like that.
no, not down, right? Like it's about multiple users hitting the system, right? You're having a lot of traffic on your server
Okay.
for checking, let's say, messages.
Okay.
What can you do to, and you can just, to simplify it, you can talk about a group chat, and let's say in my group I have 15 users, right?
Okay.
And each of them is, trying to fetch conversations. And this is, I'm just talking about one group chat, right? There can be
Yeah.
hundreds and thousands of group chats. So can you think of an approach that, how would you serve the content to tens of users of a certain chat? How would you optimize that?
Okay, we can have load balancers, of course,
Mm-hmm.
in front of our chat servers, which can map each conversation ID,
Mm-hmm.
and then it would just distribute the messages on the basis of that. Like then direct to the the request to the every server, or not every server, every every user. Like, so we can have a load balancer,
Okay.
or we can have the I don't know whether caches server would be caches would be
Yeah, I mean, caches usually are a good idea, right? When you're trying to, let's say if there are 15 people in a group, everybody is trying to fetch, the same message.
yes.
Caching can be a good idea.
So if there's a message, if there's a conversation which is more recent, so we can just store that the messages into one server, in a cache server, so that we can distribute it easily.
Mhm.
So
Yeah, that's fine.
it's the one way around.
Okay, yeah, I think we are, we should wrap now. We are kind of on time. But yeah, this was good. Thanks, Shubham.
Yeah, sure.
You,
Thank you.
Thank you, Shubham. So I think next what we can do is Shubham can do a quick self-assessment of himself, then
Yeah.
followed by some feedback from other people on the call, and then followed by DP. Shubham, do you want to do some self-assessment? The reason why giving first chance to you, because anything which you want to point out, so people should not point out. So anything you yourself want to tell.
Okay, so I think I was not more focused on APIs part. I was more focused on the designing and the scaling part initially, because because I thought that if I just design a database and the design and database and scalability more, then I can go with the JSON afterwards easily. So that's what I've thought initially, that I just designed the things initially and then just move to JSON part. That's why I was not on more focused on JSON on APIs initially. That's why. That's I think the first I think the first takeaway. The second would be like the group chats. Like I think I can think of more optimized way of a group chat. I think so. A more optimized way to handle group chats, and of course the multimedia as well.
Anything else Shubham wants to add?
I think yeah, I think we have wasted a lot of time on one topic, and we were not able to move to the push notifications, which I think we should discuss about.
Cool. Thank you, Shubham. Anybody else wants to give feedback?
And before anybody, before we open the discussion to everyone, yeah, thanks, Shubham. So I would say that can we split the feedback in two ways? Like one is more about general, like, candidates or interviewer, the questions, how to sort of more, how to navigate, right? How we address certain questions. And the second feedback can be more technical, right? Because, okay, how some of us may have questions, oh, how would we do this, right? How would we handle group chats? So let's keep those two discussions separate. Maybe just to have it clear.
So that's what I'm looking forward, that people can give feedback to Shubham like really quick, like the 3 minutes feedback, things he could done different or done well. And then for by that time, you can also consolidate your feedback.
Yeah.
And then we can wrap up the feedback section in another couple of minutes, and then we'll open the floor for like general discussion. Like if somebody gets this kind of topic, what we should do, what we should think, and I'm thinking in that way.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, let's. I agree. I mean, maybe let's keep the deep technical discussions a little later. Yeah.
People can leave if they want.
Yeah.
Okay. Anybody wants to give feedback to Shubham?
And even interviewer. That's general.
Can I have the feedback from interviewer first?
Interview trying to keep till the end. So
okay.
So interviewer's thoughts should not get influenced. So interview should give extended feedback at the end. So because otherwise people may repeat the same thing.
Okay, no issues. Okay.
Yeah, Shubham actually was a good one. So yeah, I was looking more of towards how do you do the towards more of a high level design, because that's where you really know about the scalability of this. WhatsApp is, I mean, Facebook, WhatsApp, all these are serving billions of messages a day, right? I think it's about 60 billion of messages a day. So it's if you go into WhatsApp message, right, you see the status of each of the your friends, right? And there is another one called how do I the degree of your friend, right? How do you find the degree of your friend and all, right? So that's very keen, which was built into Facebook Messenger app. So yeah, it's a very important algorithm where you use a bidirectional BSF to find out the degree of your friend. So so that's one thing. Yeah. So I had a recent conversation. I spoke with Anshuman. He was the designer of the WhatsApp Messenger. I had a discussion with him, so he told me to say. So how do you actually keep the status of the so there is something called you have certain things like long polling, and WebSocket, which we use. Basically, I think it uses WebSocket.
Yeah.
Yeah, so those things, and I think it uses Kafka. That's what I had when I was discussing.
Sorry to interrupt. We are keeping the technical part right now.
Yeah. So yeah, I was looking more of towards how it is being designed, how messages should be pushed. But it was really good that it went deep into the API part. That was interesting.
Are you saying about storing the storing the messages on the basis of the graphs, or connecting the friends with the help of the graphs technique?
Yeah.
Okay, fine. Okay, sounds good.
Anybody else wants to give the feedback? Anyone wants to give feedback to Shubham? Okay. I will count till 3. If nobody else is there, then I will give it to DP. 3, 2, 1. Okay, DP, I think you can, if you're ready.
Uh-huh. Yeah. And if anybody has any other ideas, even after I finish, feel free to jump in. So yeah, so let's talk about the good, something that I found good in Shubham's design. First of all, like just starting with the capacity scale estimations. I think it was a bit seamless. I found it seamless that how he went into what metrics he need to calculate. Sometimes it's easy to stumble there, so that was good. And then I think overall discussions at some places I found that you were picking ideas well. So that is always, I mean, this is my personal, how I look at the system design, that if you look at this question in general anywhere online, there's so many different aspects you can focus on. And depending on how the conversation is going, you may not even finish one aspect because it's a discussion-based thing, right? So some ideas that some of you shared here, right? Long polling and graphs, friends list connections, like who is in my friends list, technology side. These are all valid ideas, right? And good ones. But in my view, a lot depends on where the interviewer wants to take you, right?
Yeah.
I could have steered him towards database. I could have steered him towards the API, which is what we did, or even the high level design, right? It really depends on how you adapt and what are the different areas you're looking at. And in some real interviews, one of the things that comes to my mind is somewhere when you're interviewing, either people are familiar with your background or you are applying for a certain position. If you're applying for, let's say, a database team, they might go deep into database design. If you're going into a networking side of things, right, they might go more into this polling, sockets, and network aspect. So right now with mock interviews, it's I find it a little more holistic, and you want to be prepared at different angles of the question. So yeah, so that's how I look at it. All the different dimensions, there are like multiple dimensions to this question. I just try to get him into one of the areas. That's how I approach this question. And what now things where I feel Shubham, in my opinion, where things could have been refined is, one is like you already noticed, right? Since I was trying to focus more on APIs and how you adapt your APIs with respect to requirements, I think you were getting into the distribution, replication, fault tolerance quite early on, and I had to remind that, okay, let's not go there. So in my opinion, I like to keep these two things different, like separate. First clean one part and then focus on others. Otherwise we are mixing two things. Second is the requirements part, right? I felt that you asked me about online offline status, and I said we don't want to talk, address that. But somewhere maybe just your experience or having looked at a question, you possibly that was coming to your mind. So acknowledgements and all of that. I
Okay.
mean, we didn't want to go that right. We talked about it in requirements. So I think that's something to keep in mind during the interview. And I have seen it in other mock interviews sometimes also, that we are so tuned to one, we know this is how, let's say if I ask you to design Kafka, you would know that there is a concept of topics there, right? So it's natural to kind of lean towards it. But if your interviewer says that I don't want to, think about topics right now, then it's possibly not a good idea to get into that area. And the third thing is, I think just following up on your feedback about that we got into deep into one area, we didn't get time to get into push notifications, right? In my view, I think it's totally fine, because as an interviewer, I might have priorities about one or two, right? I'm just giving you requirements that if time permits, I want to take it there. But depending on discussion, we can just go depth first, right, in one area.
Okay.
So to me, that's how I take it, the system design interviews. But yeah, I mean, in general, basically moving forward, I would just suggest that you separate out, those high level design, system design aspects, right? Fault tolerance and stuff. Mention it. And if the interviewer wants to go there, by all means, that's a good idea. So yeah, that's my feedback. But overall, it's a good interview. I just, in my experience, I feel these system design ones can be a little ambiguous, and it really depends on how the interviewer steers you, right? It's hard to, you're thinking on your feet basically, right? So it's tricky.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Yeah, that's all from my side, Asim.
Thank you. So if there's no more feedback from others, then we can just have a general tech discussion, or BP or Shubham or anyone wants to deep dive a topic, or just want to check around something. So Shubham, do you want to start something, like something you want to check with others, like how it could be different, or DP, you want to point out something like things could be done different?
So I just wondering about the multimedia, right? I still don't have less idea about how we send the multimedia or how we store the multimedia. So if you just ponder upon that thing.
Maybe I can just start and others can chime in.
Yeah.
I think you had the right pointers. So one thing was, when I'm talking about API, right? User doesn't know much about, you have to upload the actual content in some ways, right?
Yeah.
And maybe like clarifying requirements, like can you have, one attachment or multiple attachments? That way I was looking at design in your send message. I was thinking of having like a list of like attachment, right? So I was thinking something like this. I will have a class like attachment, right? And I would have in your send message, I would have object, a list of attachments that user can send. And behind the scenes, I think you mentioned about this idea that for multimedia, you are possibly going to use external storage, and you're going to save the URL, right, of that in your database.
Yeah.
So that seemed good to me.
Okay.
That's how I was approaching it.
Okay.
Yeah, so one thing is that you should just discuss the size of the message from
Yeah.
You cannot have larger sizes, and it should be very small.
Yeah, I think that is a good point, right? Clarifying requirement, what's the size, and maybe chunking it that way. Yeah.
And
Yeah, sorry, Manoj, I interrupted.
Yeah, so the other point is that there are two parts to that. One is that you store the message and you send a thumbnail of it, just a
Yeah,
very small thumbnail of the message. So once the user clicks, that's when it starts downloading.
yeah.
Yeah, so there is other part. I'm not sure about Facebook, but WhatsApp, it pushes the message. Once you click, then it starts
Yeah.
reading the message from this
Sure.
thing.
Yeah, with images, it's a good point to keep in mind always, right? Let's say you are having even, for example, YouTube, right? When we search for something, you get a list and those are all thumbnails there, even for videos. So that's a good point.
I had a question on push notification. And when I say push notification, I'm talking about the case when you start typing. On the other side, you see, like in WhatsApp, you see like somebody's typing.
Oh, that way. Okay. Okay.
How
We were thinking differently, but yeah, this is also a good question we can talk about.
how in just a naive way, I'm thinking as soon as you start typing, you know the receiver ID,
Yeah.
the sender ID. So you would send some like one message without any data. It's like a marker message. And as
Right.
the side gets that marker, it will just show on the client side, the receiver is typing that message. That's what the problem with this, I'm thinking, is there is a lot of like back and forth going on between client and server. I mean, the server
Network traffic is a lot. Yeah.
And if there are like, this is for both receiver and sender. So if you have 100,000 receiver and 100,000 sender, you multiplied 100,000 by 100,000. That's a lot of message. That's what I'm thinking on the bad part of it. Any ideas on how?
Basically, how can we optimize the traffic, right? When you have to continuously sort of update that, user is typing or something.
Yeah.
I mean, one brute force idea I have is it may not reduce it substantially, but I'm thinking like depends on the granularity at which you are like keeping that connection open. For example, we have those things, right? About how sender and receiver are communicating, even if it's a marker message, then keeping that somewhere. We don't want to set up connections again and again, right? If you're polling or if you are receiving this update every second, you don't want to just, so you want to keep the connection open, and maybe if you can have this update every second versus every 5 seconds like that, but that won't improve it drastically, right?
When you say keeping the connection open, I was thinking it's a WebSocket and the WebSocket connection is stayed open always, is my otherwise I wouldn't know. I mean, this long polling thing will not work in the.
Yeah. I think I'm just using the wrong term. You're right. I mean, polling stuff won't, but socket. I was just thinking of something to keep it, something that should keep it open. Yeah.
So all chat message users bidirectional connection, they keep it open. Checks for keep alive. And long polling and polling, right, they do have drawbacks because the polling, right, keeps frequently checking whether it's working, and the other thing, polling, right. So if the user is not sending any message, it will still going and it will keep on checking for polling. Long polling has the same issue, but it for a certain duration it just polls and keeps. So the problem is it uses a lot of resources of the server.
Yeah.
So those are the two problems. But WebSocket is the one which generally they use and keeps open.
Yeah.
I have a question about the WebSockets in general. Like I know theoretically what a WebSocket is, but just specific if anybody has knowledge, because I was kind of curious. when a messenger starts, like there's a thread between two people, is the WebSocket between the client and the other client, or is there like a server in between?
Server in between.
Got it. But then like the two clients are connected to the server bidirectionally.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
When you say
So it normally uses 8443 port, which is again and part of it, which also is supported by HTTP, right? So
I have one other question on this WebSocket. Again, I'm in the same boat that I don't have much knowledge about, this networking and socket layers, but just reading very briefly, is it true that, we can only have limited number of, each server can only support limited number of socket connections, right?
yeah.
And socket itself
yeah.
requires memory. Is that somewhere,
Yeah, it needs, so I'll tell you. So a port supports around 65,000 connections. And internally it opens a file descriptor. Each connection, right, it opens a file descriptor. So you can set your limit of the file descriptor. If you set a limit on the file descriptor, right, it will not allow you to go beyond that. It will just block you, the number of ports, the number of connections to be open, it will block you. And it can lead to a lot of issues also. If you start bombarding your system and the file descriptor is low and you're taking more connections, the CPU will start ramping up because it's taking more connection, but the system is not allowing you to open more file descriptors, which is basically more connections.
So each connection has a file descriptor to it?
Yeah.
Okay.
So because recently we ran into a production issue because the file descriptor was very low and we were bombarding the system.
So what does file descriptor contain?
File descriptor is part of the system, any Windows, and it is like opening a file.
Okay.
Opening a file. So a connection is like opening a file in the system.
I
so
see.
Keep track of that each file in the system. And so the limit was actually low and we were bombarding the system. It was all the connections were failing, and we found out that this is because it was a highly scalable system and the SRE team set it very low. And after we opened up the entire 65,000 plus connections, then it went fine.
I see.
So the file descriptor is very so always always a connection is like opening a file in the system.
Okay.
There is a limit on that.
Maybe this was discussed, but can you just tell me once more on how the ordering of the messages is maintained when you have like a one-on-one chat and when you have like a group chat?
I think on the basis of timestamp.
Yeah.
That timestamp is based on what? The client timestamp, server's timestamp? Like you have multiple servers running, and all those servers will have different timestamp. There's no universal timestamp that like
but synchronization would be done like it is like sent on the basis of the senders.
Client timestamp.
Client I send a message, it goes through all the network and then it comes to main server, and that takes time. I don't know whether if you rely on the client timestamp, I could be in different time zone, I could be in network delay, and I don't know whether just by keeping the client timestamp as the source of truth, I can order messages based on the client timestamp. I don't have a good answer for alternative, but the client timestamp and synchronization of timestamp across server is a universal problem. Like there are like thesis written on the timestamp synchronization.
Would it be better to save the client and then change it?
We could not hear you.
Yeah, there's a lot of
disturbance in a voice. I think Shiva was saying something.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you now.
Hello.
Hello.
Yeah, we can hear you now.
I'm sorry. Can you hear me now? Okay.
Yes.
So I was going to say, would it help to save the time in GMT or UTC format? The timestamps, I mean.
Who does that?
Well, whenever we store the data, whenever the data is stored, that way these differences have been addressed.
Yeah, but I think what the question that we were thinking is, at some stage, the client timestamp has to be transformed into this generic or UTC, right?
Correct.
So would that be any contention or any conflicts possible there, or any issues there? Or is that how it's done?
I don't think so. I don't think so. If the offset is set properly in all the servers, then I don't think so there will be any problem with that, because I've done this thing in my previous, so it was not the issue for me.
So can I ask a question? So about sharding, right? If you're sharding the data, right? How are you going to tell which server has to go to which shard? This thing that.
Yeah, right. So I was trying to, the way I have approached this sharding idea, when you have multiple choices, right? And how do you talk about trade-offs? That's where I was really focusing on API, because in my opinion, there were two options, right? User ID or conversation ID. And the way I discuss this sharding is, if I say user ID, I would go through my 3 APIs I have, and I would say, okay, if I'm sending a message, I can, go to the shard corresponding to user ID, and I can, store the message there. And when I'm and we talked about duplicating it in receiver and sender. So if I'm a receiver and I come in and I hash my, ID, I hit the right server where I can get my message. Similarly, I would discuss how would my get conversation API and get messages API would help there, right? For example, get conversations, right? It is get conversations for a certain user. So if I'm sharding by user ID, I'm keeping all the conversations and messages for a user in a certain shard, right? Of course, we can talk about replication. That's next step. But so my get conversations API is also working with that model. And get messages requires a conversation ID, right? So for that, I can maintain, for example, another mapping of user and conversations, and I can find the user ID by that. So that is how I approach this question of sharding, because otherwise it can be very confusing about what interviewer is looking for, right? And similarly, in this question, so I talked about sharding by user ID, what is supported and what is not. And the crux of this, sharding by user ID was that everything looks good overall, except that I'm duplicating the message on sender and receiver side. And if I'm having a group chat, I'm duplicating it that many number of times. So that was the limitation there. And for if you shard by conversation ID and you have the 3 APIs again, you would find that I was reading it somewhere that they're talking about how for group chats, be it Slack or Teams or Facebook Messenger, conversation ID is a better way to shard, whereas for one-on-one chats, user ID is a better model. But in general, talking about the approach of discussing this, that's how I take it.
Okay, thank you. Because I think there are different types of sharding, right? So it has regional sharding, range sharding, and I read it somewhere, and zone-based sharding. Yeah,
oh, that way you are saying, okay.
Yeah, because if I'm going to communicate in Facebook, it's more of a region-based, right?
Yeah.
I was curious on the same.
Where can you go beyond the region? Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, so you go ahead. I was just curious on the same thing on the sharding part of it. Like if for a group
Right.
shard for a conversation, would you keep it only at like so someone's chatting from the US or someone's in like APAC, but do you keep the conversation ID it only once at only one, like the closest data center or server, or is it you guys kind of have to kind of replicate it in multiple
No, I'm
nodes?
sure like, I'm sure like in general, in my opinion, you are never going to have it like one server, right? Even if you're sharding and you're having that partitioning, just to serve the geographically distributed users, you would have, it like replicated based on region based and stuff. So that definitely, I think, makes sense for a large scale application.
Even with the conversation ID, would you think adding a time-based sharding on top of it would help? Like, I'm not going to get like all 1 year worth of conversation. I'm probably going to get what 1 day or 2 days. Then then I might get more. So ID also on top of that, a time-based sharding also I think would help.
I think the way I think about the time-based thing is basically you're right. Like you're not going to just shard all of the data, right? Which is multi-year, but maybe any data which I don't have to shard, right? Maybe I can move it to, let's say, a little like a different storage layer, right? Whereas any data which is more active, right? Let's say last 5 days or 7 days, a week's worth of data, that is something I can consider sharding. And
it appears that we are confusing schema and sharding as one thing, and these two are, I think, two different things. Schema is, for example, in terms of, in this case, relation would be, you will probably, I mean, if you think about relational one, then there'll be a conversational table and then there's a user table, and these two would be, of course, there's a reference between them.
I wasn't thinking of mixing them up. I am looking at them as any way I pick up sharding, right? Conversation ID, user ID, whatever metric I use. Ultimate goal of sharding is that whatever my API requests are, right? Whether I'm sending message, getting conversations, right? The whole idea is that I'm trying to optimize those API requests, right? How can I get response faster? So that's where I was thinking of, if in my API send message, for example, I'm having a sender ID, right? I see your point that you're thinking of it as that we are looking at it as schema, but I'm thinking of connecting these two because ultimately I have to serve my APIs, and that's how I'm, that's how that is what is influencing my sharding key, right?
Cool.
As that. I mean, I'm just trying to, I got your point about we are talking about fields and we are talking about this sort of table, but I was looking at it more as API and then how it's going to serve, how my sharding is going to serve my APIs.
Hey, Deepi, earlier when you said about keeping active data closer, and that active is the time. Active or non-active is the time, in my opinion. Is it something different you had in mind, or it's the same thing?
Can you repeat like what your idea was? Sorry.
I was thinking that the conversation, on the time you would also shard, and you would keep within one shard the like 1 day of data or maybe 2 days of data. And then the next will be another shard with the T-5 data.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
And then when you want to get the data, you would first go sorting like by the timestamp, the first shard, so that I get all the 5 days of data, show it. If you want more, then I can go to the previous ones. Otherwise, if you keep the conversation, then pagination will be difficult. Where in the block I am, all those metadata I need to keep track of, which is fine. But this would be much, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, this is an interesting thought. I wasn't thinking along those lines, but it seems like you are kind of, breaking it up as, okay, if I just want to fetch first 5 days data, then just hits this layer. And then only if I want to go to the next, week's data, then hit the next layer.
It depends on the product requirement. Suppose you put a search on top of it, then you need to hit like all the shards to see whether it is there or not. So many of what we say or what we speak depends on the requirement.
Right. Correct. I agree.
Replicate the data for another search service which is having all the data without any shard, and then you search only that record, and you hit the conversation for different server. Those maybe are things which you need to talk with the.
No, I think these are good ideas, right? Because especially in interviews, thank you. If we talk about these things, these shows, again, like I am not an experienced like interviewer. I'm just saying from my opinion, how I look at it. But it's an interesting idea.
I have a couple of comments, couple of quick comments on I was really confused in the beginning of the interview about the conversation view. I think the Shubham also, maybe he has asked a couple of questions on the conversations and messages. When I hear the term conversation view, I was kind of immediately going in the Outlook view, where it has a conversation view and then several people maybe responding to the same conversation. So I was trying to club together. But I think, Dippy, that what you're after though is that by recipient only, right? So you're basically sending messages per recipient.
Yeah, per recipient or per group,
Right. Okay. That's why I took some time to get to that.
No, it makes sense. I also felt that maybe, we could have a little, maybe in the beginning, if I could have clarified it better, or, Shubham, could have asked questions, because I noticed that it got a little confusing.
Right. The other thing on the API, what I thought it would have been helpful for me before getting into the actual signatures of the methods, just to high level, what are the services that we're going to be needing, like get open conversations, send messages, or whatever that we could think of at the high level. Then maybe dig deeper into the method signatures. I don't know. I'm new to the interview portion as well. So I was just thinking out loud here. That would have been little help. And then also the comment that you made, Dippy, on the you have seen several solutions to this problem. I would like to know, are there any other resources if I want to? Now we have seen one solution, thanks to you and Shubham, how to solve this, but I want to see a few others, and can you recommend any on this topic?
I know, I didn't discuss it here, but maybe I can share, like recently I was going over some of these things, and I noticed some very interesting sessions given by people from Facebook itself, and they were really digging into how did they scale the likes and comments feature, right? Like this is just taken as one small point in overall, if you look at the general system design questions, but they actually talked about, they gave a full session on how Facebook scaled the likes and comments feature. And also another session that was very, very interesting was, if you think about the live videos, right, feature, that really takes a different dimension. I think if you look at the conventional questions in system design, whether it's, I have heard of this educative, croaking system design and all of that, I have only seen YouTube or Netflix, right? And you would notice the big difference between live videos and these, because live videos, you just cannot anticipate how many viewers will be there for a certain video, right? And there can be so many people doing live streams. So I think that question, and again, that was a session given by people from Facebook. So maybe if it's not exactly related to the messenger, right? I'm going a little different here, but talking about resources, I can share those and yeah, any other things about Messenger that people know.
Yeah, that would be helpful. That would be helpful.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, so you just need to go to Facebook engineering page. You'll get free information.
Yeah.
Facebook
I
engineering.
recently saw a session on how they scaled Instagram. Oh, that was so fascinating about, like some of you here were talking about region-based, partitioning and scaling, and they gave a real use case about how they did it. It was really a fascinating
Where
session.
you have seen it? All these videos on YouTube?
YouTube, yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Deepi, I have a question. So can you please tell me how you are storing the messages for the comment messages? So you have some images and also some text, right? So how
Right.
you are storing it in the database?
Oh, so I can talk about the multimedia stuff, but did you also mention something about comments?
Just text, right?
Just the
So
text, right?
yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, my point there was just that if it's a text, right? Again, with text, you can have a discussion about, is there a limit, right, on the text that we are allowing user to store? But if it's something which can fit into a, if you're going with, let's say, a relational as an example, then you can store text within a certain size. But for multimedia like images and videos and stuff, we can go with storing them in an external storage. Like when the user, let's say, attaches an image, right, sends an image, you can take that image and store that in HDFS or S3, and you can generate a URL to that location, and you can store that URL in your relational or whatever other data store you're using. That way, the advantage is you can scale these multimedia storage and your other metadata storage or message related information at different levels of granularity.
So how are we actually storing this? So can you please tell me the schema of this message? So I got your point that we will put the images and other things in
Right.
a
So I was thinking something like this, right? Like Shubham had in his API, we have this send message where you have, I'm just typing in the chat window right now. So you have message text, let's say, and you have a list of, you have a list of attachments, right? And attachments can be a class, right? Which has, let's say, some, image, whatever that binary format or stuff. And in your system design, when you start drawing, having a high level system. So my thought was that you would hit the server with that, content, and then you would take that and offload it to a, you will draw another box where representing HDFS or S3, and you will just send your bytes for that image to that blob, and you will return a path URL that you will save in your database.
Okay, I'm actually more interested on the database schema part, because what would be the length of these columns if you were using?
Oh, right, that way, or
like
data
how you
types.
store how you store the text SMSs like that?
Yes.
So I read somewhere that the MySQL and the relational database would not be the best way to approach these things, because there are billion of messages. So I read about the HBase, using the HBase, but I don't know about very much about HBase database.
So Shubham, why would relational not be a good fit again?
Well, I read somewhere it says that there are a billion of messages and not be good to store in SQL or Postgres.
But why?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying, that there are a billion of messages stored at one server or so. That's why.
I mean, that is one thing that always makes me, leads to discussion, because I think with this NoSQL, right? Even if you look at Instagram, right? That video that I'll, on YouTube, they're using Postgres, right? They're using MySQL for storing all the comments and whatnot. So my point is, this is my observation, right? Correct me if I'm wrong. And many of you here are actually working on these large scale systems. So you would have that knowledge, practical knowledge there. But I also feel that with all these NoSQL buzz, I hear this all the time, that relational cannot scale, so I'm switching to NoSQL. But I am not convinced that unless I have a very concrete argument about something, why cannot something, I understand there are aspects that NoSQL serves better than relational for sure, right? Even scalability, if you're just storing key value versus you are having a schema, and there are some logical ways which I agree with. Let's say you dump data into relational database and you have a schema, right? You have all these data types and stuff. So at the right time, when you're writing data into your database, there is a step where you have to make sure that your incoming data conforms with your schema, with your data types, right? Whereas in HDFS and all these, you're just dumping data, right? So your load time will be very faster, right? Compared to relational, where you're doing all these checks and barriers. I get that part, but things like, something like, for example, a SQL server, right? It has like these data types like varchar. It can support, certain data types which can go till 8,000 characters. So if your message is, I don't know, I mean,
I'm just saying on the basis of the read write operations, because read and write operations would be heavier if we use SQL. That's
so,
why.
but can't we scale SQL, right? In the sense that if I have a distributed SQL, right? If I have a distributed relational system where I have multiple, let's say 10 servers, I'm not trying to really make a case for SQL, but I'm just trying to brainstorm about whenever we think of SQL, a lot of times we only are saying one node. That's not it, right? If you look at, all these relational services these days, be it Amazon or Microsoft, right? They are having all these cloud services where even you have 10 servers, each of them is running a SQL relational database. So, I mean, maybe somebody can, give me some more idea.
I mean, I just want someone to just ponder upon whether we should use MySQL or just use HBase or
So I was actually thinking to use a text file for each of the conversations. So each of the messages will get appended in the text file, and we will put this text file in S3 or some distributed storage, and we can tie this file URL with the conversation ID. So I'm not sure if this will be a good idea, but this is how I'm thinking.
That's a good, interesting idea. I mean, I never thought of that. But do you think if we store it in sorry, was there?
No, writing into a file, right, is an expensive operation, and reading from a file is in the next.
And also, if I want to fetch, let's say, top 5 messages, right? Maybe I can, isn't it that if I have it in some sort of data store, right, other than file, I mean, this fetching of this top K messages would be better, because otherwise you will be reading the file.
No, we can still do the top K fetching because we still have the conversation ID, right? So we can, based on the conversation ID, we can actually fetch those conversations. And once some user want to dig into the messages, want to see the messages of that conversation, only then we can pull those informations.
Yeah, I mean to say that point only, that let's say in one conversation, I have, for example, 100 messages, right? And we are storing, you're saying that I have a file where I store all the messages of a certain conversation. So now when I hit the API that get messages for conversation ID 1, right? And my general requirement is that I want to first show 10 messages, last 10 messages. Then isn't it that, okay, I'm reading that whole file for that conversation ID, and then I am trying to apply logic which tells me the last 10.
So can we, I'm not sure if this can be possible, but I was thinking if it is possible to read a particular file from a particular offset. So on that, we can actually read the last few lines.
It is possible, yeah.
So I think if there's a requirement that if you liked a message, right, then how you store that thing in a text file.
So there
Like
No, for that
If you like the message, like if you react on a particular message in a chat, like we do, like we do in Facebook Messenger, then I think it would defeat the
I think
purpose.
we can still do it in the text file, right? Because if you ever saw any kind of subtitle file, the one that we have associated with any kind of movies, so they have this timestamp and some texts. So in our case, we can just put those some special emoji or some text Unicode value in the text file. That way we can later convert it to the appropriate emoji or something like that.
One thing is that opening and keeping that file open for all the conversation, like in a text file, that file opening and closing itself is going to take a lot of resources. Like you are imagining like opening and closing thousands of conversation in a file. Somebody said that earlier, that it's a high resource constraint operation. Unless you're keeping one file open and you're like dumping everything, for each conversation, if you start opening and closing files, that's going to be very expensive operation.
To that point which DP was adding, like you can use MySQL as well. Like I don't know why they use NoSQL, but NoSQL is better than MySQL. That's what I have also read. But in order to fetch the top K comments, or in order to have scalable MySQL databases, like YouTube uses MySQL databases on the back end. It uses something called as the Vitess.
It's pretty amazing.
Like, it uses something. Yes, I don't really know how they scale it, but they have their own distributed locking system to scale their MySQL servers and all.
Okay, so YouTube directly does not use MySQL. See, they use big data, big table, which is the first NoSQL database which came out. I think it was the first NoSQL concept came out.
No, I mean
for
to say
transactional base, they use
folks.
only for
so we are almost at time. I need to stop the recording, but keep continuing checking. But if anybody wants to leave the chat, so thank you, DP, thank you everyone. Thank you Shubham for this wonderful session. So with that,